Well, if that's the case, that we can get this good tasting sausage at the end through compromise, why is it that compromising has become such a negative idea now?
I don't know, and to me that's a real shame, because if you can't, if you have people so far to the left and the right, and if you can't find a middle ground, then nothing happens. You have a stalemate, and we have critical issues facing our country. I mean, we've got a deficit that the president has acknowledged is critical to our nation's future. Getting it under control is critical to our nation's future. Mm-hmm. So to deal with the deficit, we're going to have to find ways to cut our expenditures or raise taxes, or a combination of both. And that's going to require a discussion across the aisle between Democrats and Republicans to find a compromise. And I think that's one of the things that has bothered me about the Republican Party in Tennessee. As I said to you earlier in our discussion, Senator Howard Baker would not find a place in today's Republican Party because it's gone so far to the right. And I just worry about Tennessee not being able to sort of find that compromise, that common ground in the middle that moves us forward on the critical issues of education and jobs for our state.
Well, let's continue talking about Tennessee for a moment and come local here. Obviously, there are some big political races coming up in Tennessee's future. This fall's governor's election is already drawing a lot of attention, and millions of dollars have already been raised by some of the candidates. How important do you think money is in campaigning?
Well, it's very important. Certainly, it's the mother's milk of politics. Because of the expense of communicating in today's world, TV, radio, new media, money is a vital tool and important. And we've seen that in this recent governor's race and the release of the money that's been raised. But it also doesn't outweigh hard work and retail campaigning and organizational work. And we saw that in President Barack Obama's campaign. He was well funded in his effort, but also had a huge volunteer and grassroots machine that he built across the country, beginning in Iowa and running across the United States in that campaign. So I don't care how much money you have, if you don't have a campaign grassroots organization in place that's working hard and dedicated, motivated volunteers, I don't think you can get elected. So it's those two things with an excellent candidate, which it really always begins with the candidate for that particular community or that particular time, and with that candidate you build the resources of money and grassroots organizing to win.
Do you think the recent Supreme Court decision dealing with campaign finance is going to affect some of these local races?
Absolutely, and it's horrible. I mean, it's one of the worst decisions. The president acknowledged that in his State of the Union address. We're going to open a floodgate of money that will pollute our political process. The long-term consequences of this are going to be very, very bad for the country. And I hope Congress can, in the very near term, come up with a legislative solution to get corporate and union money. It's both sides. We don't need to see this kind of pollution in our political process. And right now, the Supreme Court's decision technically overrules the Tennessee state prohibition on corporate contributions. Now, there is a law against it, but a corporation may step up this fall and decide to spend money and test the veracity of that law, and I think in court, in federal court, would probably win. So we're going to see, most likely, corporate money for the first time in a long time in Tennessee politics, and it's going to be very bad for citizens. It's very bad for our state and our country.
Well, there are some congressional races here that are also getting a lot of attention. With the retirement of Bart Gordon, the 6th district seat covering much of Middle Tennessee is now wide open. Can you make any predictions about how things are going to go in the primary and general election there?
Well, we are certainly working very hard to recruit a good candidate for the Democratic nomination in the 6th Congressional District. We're having a number of discussions. The congressman just last December announced, and it's a very big decision for anybody. So we're talking to a number of prospective candidates, and we feel confident that we'll have a good candidate. One of the things the National Republican Party has talked about for a number of years is that Bart Gordon is vulnerable and that district is vulnerable, and Bart Gordon has consistently proved them wrong by his strong re-election margins year in and year out. What other good thing for us is that it appears as if there will be a pretty tough Republican primary. Could be a very bloody Republican primary. Lou Ann Zelenik, the Tea Party candidate out of Rutherford County, is in that race, and the whole Tea Party movement will have some impact on the Republican primary there, and we're not quite sure how it will sort of come out. But I do think that the Republican primary will be pretty bloody, and if we have a strong sort of moderate to conservative Democratic nominee going up against a wounded Republican, I think our prospects for holding on to that seat could be good.
Okay. One last set of ideas to deal with here. You mentioned in our previous conversation that you often went to conservative media outlets and spoke at those. Do you think that there is bias in the media today?
I think there is, because journalists and newspaper reporters are human beings like us and have their bias, and so I think you see that. And I think what's interesting is that viewers over time sort of learn that bias and then understand when Bill O'Reilly is commenting that a Democrat might take his comments with a grain of salt. And I think that viewers are smart enough, people are smart enough to know. But what we ask for is just a reporter or a journalist doing their best job to give us an honest portrayal of what's going on so that we as citizens can make that decision as to where we stand on the issue.
Okay. Do you think perhaps that the media bias leans more one way than the other? One of the things I've always heard is that it's a liberal media bias. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that the new media, Twitter and the rest, have switched that paradigm some?
Well, I certainly, in my view, think it's pretty balanced. I mean, you've got Fox, you've got the Washington Times, you've got American Spectator. I mean, there are plenty of media outlets that balance out if what might be called the liberal media. I do think that that's kind of a cheap shot at reporters who are actually doing a pretty good job of exposing things that have happened. The New York Times exposed the fact that President Bush was eavesdropping and violating the law on millions of Americans' cell phone calls in the name of national security, and they're accused of being the liberal media. I think they were doing a doggone good job of bringing to the American people something that the Bush administration shouldn't be doing, and I think that was a way for the Bush administration to kind of deflect the spotlight, the glare of what they were doing by sort of framing that as the liberal media. But in fact, I think journalists are doing their job, and that's important for us it's the fourth estate, and as Thomas Jefferson said, and what we're doing here today, this is very important for people to hear this discussion so that they can make their own rational decision.
Do you think it's time then, along that idea of people making a rational decision, do you think that Republicans and Democrats really represent all of the views? Is it time potentially for a viable third party?
Well, that's been a sort of an age-old question. I think the way that politics works in America today is healthy, and that the third party process, frankly, if you look at sort of what the third parties might look like, they would actually hurt the Republican Party and enhance the Democratic Party, because as Ross Perot did in 1992, sort of carved out votes from George Bush, allowing Bill Clinton and Al Gore to become president and vice president. So from a partisan perspective, I would ultimately see that as pretty good. But I think that the system with all its warts works pretty well, particularly the primary process and then moving into the general election. So I like how we operate in America. Other countries, England, Israel, France, have multi-party systems. Germany, they have evolved over time, and I think ours is efficient. What's important, if you look at sort of national politics and the presidential campaign, ultimately the people who win are sort of in the middle. Sort of maybe a little left of center on the Democratic side, a little left of the right on the Republican side, and that's good for the country. I said earlier, the progress we've made as a nation over time has been generally incremental, and those incremental changes allow everybody to get adjusted to that change as we sort of move forward. Revolution and chaos, as we've seen in other countries, as a practical political situation, is not really good. And so sort of staying in the middle and incrementally changing our system is in my view, from a policy perspective, a better way to govern. And so I like the system that we have.
So you would agree with the idea that we're not really red states or blue states, we're purple?
Yes. Yes, and Tennessee is a great example. I mean, we've had Lamar Alexander, who served as governor for 8 years. We had Ned McWhorter, who served as governor for 8 years. We had Don Sundquist and Phil Bredesen. I mean, if you look at how Tennessee has gone, and those candidates were all sort of in the middle. Governor Bredesen's leadership as a moderate to conservative business Democrat has been tremendous for the state, and Tennesseans, Democrats or Republicans, have appreciated that.
Very good. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you coming on and speaking with us.
Grady, glad to be here, and I hope to be invited back sometime.
Very good. If you would like more information about the Democratic Party in Tennessee, you can log on to their website at tndp.org. And we hope you will join us next time here on Inside Politics.